He arrived before the sun rose, his car headlights cutting through the low fog that crawled across the fields like a living thing, damp, dense, and far too silent for that hour of the morning. The veterinarian's name was Raphael. He was 32 years old and the kind of man who believed everything could be explained with a scalpel, a report, and technique. Little did he know that on that land, logic was the first thing to be devoured. As he passed through the rusted gate, it wasn't the smell of cattle, grass, or manure that hit his nose, but a sweet, rancid odor like raw meat forgotten under the sun, except there was no sun. The sky was a motionless gray stripe, and the cows, scattered in the distance, looked like black statues in the mist, all standing still, all motionless, as if they were waiting for something that didn't have a name yet. The farmhouse appeared after 5 minutes on a dirt road full of potholes and rust-stained wires. It was an old wooden structure, raised on a wide porch where a worn-out hammock swayed. Raphael stepped out of the car, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked to the door. Before he could even knock, it creaked open on its own with a dry snap, revealing the figure of a tall, bony man with eyes sunken like dead craters. It was the farmer, his new employer, who neither gave a name nor a smile. He simply said, "This place is bad, bad beneath the flesh." Then he turned his back and walked away, dragging his feet in an arrhythmic pace, as if one side of his body was sinking under a weight the other couldn't bear. Raphael stood there for a few seconds, the cold breeze brushing the back of his neck, trying to make sense of that reception. His phone had no signal, the car radio hissed with constant static, and even the sound of insects seemed muffled. There was too much silence. When he entered the house, he noticed the floor creaked in different tones, as if some boards hid compartments or were hollower than they should be. The living room was dark, filled with old furniture covered in cloths, and the windows were nailed shut with crossed boards. In the corner, a black and white photograph showed a group of dirty men holding what appeared to be cattle heads. But upon closer inspection, Raphael realized that some of those decapitated faces had human teeth, open eyes, and expressions frozen in an eternal scream. The farmer pointed with a curt arm gesture that the veterinarian could settle in the small room at the back where the tools were kept. It was small, cold, with a wooden bed and a weak light bulb hanging from exposed wires. Raphael didn't complain. Something inside him already sensed it would be useless. As he lay down for a few minutes, he heard a hollow sound from the ceiling, like water dripping into cans, but the weather was dry. The sound was rhythmic, like someone walking on the roof with their hands. When he stepped outside for some air, he saw that no clouds moved, no leaves stirred, and the pasture remained still. In the shed, where the sick animals were kept in isolation, he found 2 skinny oxen, eyes rolled back, breathing shallowly, bodies unmoving. One had dark foam dripping from its mouth, and the other looked dead but was still standing, as if rigor mortis had set in without allowing collapse. Raphael approached carefully, placed his hands on the animal's ribs, and felt a faint pulse, as if the heart was beating, but out of rhythm. The farmer appeared in the doorway at that moment and said, his voice raspy like old wood, "When they die like this, it's because the earth tried to pull." Then he turned away again, disappearing into the shadows of the wooden corridor. Raphael stood there, his hand still on the ox's hide, trying to grasp what that meant. But when he looked into the animal's white eyes, white as turned lime, he had the eerie feeling that something, deep within the flesh, was staring back at him. The next morning, Raphael woke with a dry throat, cracked lips, and the sound of flies buzzing behind the door. Heat had begun to spread through the farm like an underground fever, but there was no sun, no wind, no birds. The sky remained locked in the same metallic hue, as if time had stopped spinning in that place. As he walked toward the shed where he had left the 2 sick oxen, he noticed the ground felt softer beneath his feet, as if the earth had begun to swell from the inside out. When he entered, the stench of clotted blood made him blink hard, and a shiver ran down his spine before he even saw what had changed. The ox that had remained standing, despite showing no signs of life, now lay collapsed, its skin torn open from neck to belly. There were no signs of external violence, no tools, no visible marks. It was as if the animal had opened itself from the inside out. Raphael knelt down, pulled on his gloves, and took a deep breath. He needed to stay rational, do what he had been trained to do. He began the autopsy with a scalpel, exposing the internal organs. But what he found made his stomach churn. The ox had no stomach, no liver, no recognizable lungs. There was only a heap of human bones mixed with straw, teeth, fragments of small rib cages, and a full human skull belonging to a woman, still entangled with strands of hair wrapped around the vertebrae. As he tried to touch the skull with forceps, one of the cows outside let out a low, guttural moo. Not a normal sound, but one that resembled a muffled scream coming from someone drowning. He stumbled back, shaking, and ran to the house to find the farmer, but the man was nowhere to be found. Raphael searched every room, shouted his name, pried open windows that had been nailed shut, found empty closets and an old suitcase filled with children's clothes. But there was no trace of the man. Only when he returned to the porch did he hear a sound coming from beneath the house. It was like wood bending under weight, but it didn't give. The sound was steady, repetitive, like muffled breathing. He crouched down to peer through the cracks in the floorboards, and there in the darkness he saw two bare legs, motionless, caked in mud up to the knees, standing in complete silence. Raphael recoiled instantly, stumbling down the porch stairs and falling onto his back. When he looked again, there was nothing there. He sat in the dust, panting, trying to convince himself he was tired, maybe hallucinating, but something deep in his chest told him that this farm held more than just sick animals. He decided to isolate the oxen and head to the nearest police station, but the car wouldn't start. Not even the engine clicked, as if it had been drained of the will to function. When he opened the hood, he found the entire interior filled with wet feathers, soaked in mud. None of the wires appeared burnt, but something was scratched into the bottom of the compartment, etched with fingernails. Between skin and soil, the bone never lies. Unsure what else to do, he returned to the shed to gather his tools and try to contact someone, but when he entered, he noticed the other ox was gone. It had simply vanished. No drag marks, no hoof prints, no trace of blood. The fence was untouched. Raphael searched the area, and then he saw it. Far out in the field, the ox was standing, facing away. As he got closer, he realized the animal was suspended. Its hooves did not touch the ground. It floated, just a few centimeters above the dry grass, its legs completely stiff. When Raphael tapped it with a metal rod, the ox collapsed to the ground with a dull thud, and the grass around it instantly withered, as if life had been sucked from the vegetation in a 2-meter radius. When he opened the animal's body, Raphael found a single human heart, still warm, faintly beating, and lodged deep within the creature's windpipe something impossible. A wooden crucifix soaked in blood with a message burned into it: bodies to the earth, souls to the cattle. At that moment, the cows grazing in the distance began to move, slowly, all at once, in the same direction, marching in silence toward the house. Raphael spent the night wide awake, sitting on the floor of his makeshift room with the rusty shotgun from the shack at his side, though he wasn't even sure if it worked. Every gust of wind sounded like something dragging itself along the walls, and the cows, well, they stayed until dawn, standing silent, encircling the house in a crescent shape, all facing the porch, unmoving like sentinels of flesh. At 4 a.m, one of them let out a low moo, a sound like a drowning infant trying to breathe, and immediately afterward, all of them dispersed, walking away as if they had received some invisible command. When daylight finally spilled across the farm, there was no sun or full clarity, only a pale whiteness in the sky, as if time existed there in perpetual suspension. With trembling hands and a throbbing head, Raphael set out toward the southern pasture, determined to conduct an improvised excavation on his own. He had marked the spot the day before, where the grass had withered around the floating ox. That exact location seemed to radiate something he couldn't explain but could feel deep in his gut. He brought a shovel, a flashlight, and collection bags. As soon as he struck the ground, he felt the earth yield too easily. It was like digging through wet sand mixed with oil. Within minutes, he had dug a shallow pit, from which rose a nauseating smell like burnt human fat. Then his shovel hit something hard, a hollow sound. It wasn't stone, it wasn't metal. He dug further with gloved hands, and amid the viscous mud emerged the first concrete evidence of what he feared most. A human bone, whole, with small, irregular bite marks, as if it had been gnawed on by children. He carefully removed it, but just beneath came more. Tibias, femurs, clavicles, fingers still clinging to bits of dark flesh, thin ribs like those of young people. And then, at the bottom of the pit, something made Raphael recoil, his entire body trembling. A horn, a long, twisted horn with human tissue stitched into its base. It looked like it had been implanted in someone, or in something. He pulled hard and felt resistance. He had to dig faster, frantically, until the rest of the structure surfaced. What emerged from the earth was a hybrid, a shriveled human torso, curled into a fetal position, its skin dried like rawhide, and two horns sprouting from its forehead. Where the face should have been, there was only a dark hole, eyeless, where something moved subtly. Breathing, the thing was ancient and alive. Raphael fell to his knees, gasping, trying to determine whether he was going insane. But then he heard it again, a low, muffled moo coming from inside the pit. He staggered back, stumbling, covering everything back up with dirt. But just before sealing the hole, something at the bottom caught the light. A necklace with a golden pendant engraved with the initials E.S., speckled with fresh blood on its surface. At that moment, the farmer appeared behind him without making a sound, his eyes glassy and his lips trembling. He said only, "She was my wife. I buried her here, but she still walks through the womb of the earth." Raphael wanted to reply, demand answers, run, but the old man extended his hand, revealing a deep scar running from wrist to elbow, a spiral-shaped scar. Then he pointed to the pasture and whispered, "The soil accepts flesh, but it doesn't accept regret." The veterinarian took the samples and returned to the house, shaken, determined to leave as soon as he could get signal on his phone. But that night, when he opened his backpack to store the bones, he found something that hadn't been there before. A vertebra with skin still attached, and on it a tattoo. His own name. That night fell without warning, as if the light had been swallowed all at once. The sky went completely dark at exactly 6 o'clock, with no sunset, no orange horizon, no usual sounds of nighttime creatures. Everything fell silent. Raphael barricaded the front door with a plank of wood, shut all the windows, and shoved the cabinet against the kitchen entrance, as if danger could come from inside just as much as from outside. The silence was so absolute that his own heartbeat sounded deafening. Until, around 3 in the morning, he heard it. Not a normal sound. It was a moo, but not from the corral nor the pasture. It came from beneath the house, a deep, drawn-out moo, slow like a mournful chant muffled by the earth. And it came in waves, repeating, as if something was breathing from within the soil. Raphael stood up, shotgun in one hand, flashlight in the other. He trembled so much that the light jittered on the walls, casting grotesque shadows from the furniture. He walked to the corner of the room where the sound was strongest. The floorboards vibrated beneath his feet, as if about to burst into splinters. He knelt and pressed his ear to the wood. He heard hooves scraping against timber below. Slowly, he began to pry the boards loose with a screwdriver, one by one, until he created an opening. The flashlight's beam revealed a low, damp crawl space filled with twisted roots, and among them, tracks of something large that dragged itself, leaving ruts in the mud, and hoofprints. He entered cautiously, crouched low, and was hit by a thick smell of blood mixed with sour milk. He walked a few meters until he saw, wedged between two roots, a leather mask with crude stitching. It was a calf mask, but molded for a human face, with eye holes and clasps on the inside. Raphael turned it over, and there was still skin stuck to the interior. When he touched it, the moo returned, now closer, making the house tremble. He instinctively turned off the flashlight and was swallowed by complete darkness. All he could hear was his breathing, and the deep, wet sound of something crawling beneath, coming toward him. He felt hot breath against his leg, and then a low voice, indecipherable, almost childlike, whispered in his ear, "Give back the bone." Raphael threw himself out of the hole and ran to the kitchen, slipping, slamming into furniture, his stomach clenching. He vomited thick black sludge into the sink corner, smelling of copper and raw fat. But what came out with it made him freeze. 2 small human teeth, child-sized. He picked them up with tweezers and sealed them in an alcohol jar. He was resolute. He had to leave by morning, even on foot if necessary. But something told him it was already too late. He felt a strange weight inside his chest, as if he had swallowed stones or fragments of bone. At dawn, he went out to the corral and saw that all the oxen were restless, circling in panic, their nostrils bleeding, eyes rolled back. One of them rammed into the fence, cracking its own horns while mooing madly. But what truly froze Raphael's blood was what he saw inside the stable. The packed earth floor had split open during the night, and from the crack rose a thick white mist that climbed to the ceiling and dissipated into the air. The soil trembled slightly, as if something were trying to rise, and in the center of the fissure, someone, or something, had marked in blood a spiral symbol, identical to the one Raphael had seen on the farmer's arm. Around it, laid in a perfect circle, were 4 ox hearts, still warm, each positioned like an offering. He collapsed to his knees, cold sweat pouring from his skin, and then, for the first time, he realized something horrific. The mooing wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from Haori, inside him. It was as if something that breathed in the dark had taken root in his chest, and now it pulsed with him, through him, like a parasite, or a bond. That murky morning, with no horizon in sight, Raphael couldn't bring himself to look the cattle in the eyes. There was something in those animals that no longer belonged to the natural order, the way they breathed asymmetrically, as if a single invisible lung pulled air for all of them at once, the way their necks tilted to the same side, like sunflowers with no light. But what disturbed him most was the silence. A heavy, almost solid silence, where not even flies dared to buzz. No leaves stirred, and even his footsteps made no sound. The only noise was the earth, that hollow murmur that seemed to come from deep below, as if the ground were in constant digestion. Raphael decided to dig, not out of curiosity, not out of courage, but out of desperation. The crack that had opened in the stable served as his starting point. He took a hoe, a flashlight, a jar of formaldehyde, and an old tape recorder, since his phone remained dead. He began slowly, pushing through thick layers of clay, which gave way with unnatural ease. The soil was soaked, but not with water. It carried the acidic stench of rotting fat. In less than half an hour, he hit his first obstacle, a human vertebra, still fresh, wrapped in a warm, milky slime. Then came femurs, ribs, a child's arm with a perfectly preserved hand, as if someone had stored it in salt, and beneath it all was something that should never have been unearthed. He found a stitched body, human in the torso with dark, dried skin, but the limbs were bovine legs, poorly attached, fastened with pins and crude twine. Where a face should have been, there was an inverted cow skull, carved with circular symbols that seemed to move if stared at too long. And in its exposed ribcage, like shelves, rested stacked human tongues, all with the tips severed. It was an altar made of flesh. Raphael fell backward, screaming, but heard no sound from his own mouth. Everything had been swallowed by that same absolute vacuum. The recorder trembled in his hand, light still blinking, working. But when he checked the tape, the only thing captured was a sequence of deep, guttural noises, rapid moos, played in reverse. He backed away, tripped, and his foot sank into a second fissure, revealing a tunnel carved through the dirt beneath the pasture, like an open vein. He entered, driven by an unexplainable urgency, and descended about 3 meters until he reached a natural chamber formed of hardened clay. At the center, a full cow skeleton with human cords tied between the ribs, and around the walls, names etched into the clay: E.S., A.S., M.F., J.G., and a new one, still fresh, Rafael A. Lima. He touched his name with trembling fingers and felt the wall pulse. Then the entire room began to moan, as if dozens of mouths were whispering from the other side of the clay. Indecipherable words in the rhythm of prayer, but spoken in fractured voices, throats torn. He climbed out, staggering, covered in mud, blood trickling from his nose, no longer knowing whether what lived down there was spirit or flesh, or both. He emerged from the tunnel and dragged himself back to the house, coughing up earth, gasping for air. But just before reaching the porch, he heard it again, the moo. Now stronger, closer, more internal. And then before him, a new sight. The oxen had formed a spiral in the pasture, walking in slow circles, and at the center stood a naked child, covered in mud, horns sprouting from her forehead, and eyes completely white. He looked at him and smiled. The figure appeared at the end of the dirt road like a solid shadow against the fog-white sky. Raphael watched from the window on his knees, his eyes sunken and muscles trembling. The man was walking silently, dressed in a time-darkened cassock, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of something invisible, and a broken rosary wrapped around his left wrist. No sound announced his arrival. Not footsteps, not rustling leaves, not the whistle of winds that had vanished from that place days ago. When he stopped in front of the house, he didn't knock, didn't call. He simply raised his face. And Raphael, for a moment, felt watched, not by eyes, but by voids. There was too much absence in that gaze. The farmer appeared soon after, coming from the pasture, as if he already knew the visit had been scheduled. No words passed between the two men, only a gesture. The priest pointed to the sky with a gnarled finger, then to the ground with the same hand. The farmer nodded, turned, and entered the barn. The priest then knelt in the middle of the yard and pulled a thick book from inside his cassock, but the pages were blank. Still, he turned them slowly, as if reading through time. Raphael, hidden behind the curtain, held his breath. The scene before him didn't seem real or even possible, but it was there, alive, embodied. And then the priest began to murmur, not with his mouth, but with his open throat. A grotesque sound escaped through a horizontal slit just below his chin. It was as if the man's throat had been slit long ago, yet he still emitted twisted prayers through scarred flesh. It was a litany without language, without logic, made of elongated vowels and gurgling syllables. And as the sound spread through the motionless air, the cows in the distance began to move, slowly, all in the same direction. The shadows of the trees danced in spiral patterns as if the non-existent light obeyed the liturgy pouring from that profane throat. The farmer returned, carrying a wooden box with 3 vials. He placed them at the priest's feet, who sniffed each one in turn. Raphael watched everything, every detail, and something inside him screamed that he needed to act, escape, run. But his body no longer obeyed. He was cold with sweat. The air felt thick, heavy, reeking of curdled milk and overturned earth. Then the priest stood, closed the empty book, and looked directly at him, straight at the window where Raphael hid. And there, facing the void of that face, he felt like a calf before the blade. The priest stepped forward slowly. Each footfall made the porch wood creak, as if he carried 100 bodies inside that cassock. He stopped at the door, lifted his bony hand, and drew a spiral symbol in the air, the same one Raphael had seen in the mud grave and on the farmer's arm. Then he pulled a burlap sack from his pocket and placed it on the ground. Inside, a heavy object dropped with a dull thud. When Raphael opened the door to see what it was, the priest was already gone, without sound, without footprints, without a silhouette on the horizon. Inside the sack was aught a human jawbone, and burned into the teeth in scorched letters were the words, "You already speak to them." Raphael collapsed to his knees and tried to pray, but the words came out twisted in another tongue, as if something was using his mouth from within. And when he looked in the mirror in the living room, he didn't recognize his own tongue. It was thick, dark, marked with ridges, and it trembled. Night fell with a frantic urgency, as if it sought to erase everything that light had left behind by mistake. No stars dared pierce that opaque sky. Time felt suspended, neither night nor dawn, just a nameless interval where the real and the unthinkable shared the same space. Raphael turned on every light in the house, even knowing most flickered like funeral candles. He locked doors, pushed furniture, sealed windows with sheets and heavy objects. But when he peered through a slit in the curtain, what he saw froze the blood in his veins. The cows were back, all of them, not in the corral, not in the pasture, right in front of the house. They formed a perfect circle around the porch, their bodies lined up like a living ring of flesh. They were still, breathing slowly, but their eyes were worse than anything. Completely white, no pupils, no corneas, as if they had been deliberately blinded. And yet, Raphael could feel them, staring into the house, staring at him. He ran to the kitchen door and tried to escape through the back. Nothing. Another circle. More cows. Surrounded. No moos, no footsteps, no creaking leather. Only the synchronized breathing of a herd now bound by a single will. A will that no longer belonged to the living. He tried to speak, to cry for help, to call someone, but his voice came out muffled, as if his throat had been sewn shut from within. His tongue ached. The roof of his mouth throbbed. When he spat into the sink, out came a stream of blood and a tooth. Staggering, he returned to the living room and found the television on, an impossible detail since there had been no power since the night before. The screen flickered in black and white, but without static. What was being shown wasn't a broadcast, but old footage. And what he saw made his stomach clench. It was himself, digging the mud grave, collecting the bones, cleaning the skull, opening the ox's flesh. But the camera angles were impossible. Some shots came from within the earth, others from above, as if something were watching him from all directions at once. And in every frame, his eyes were white, like the cattle. He kicked the TV off, but it stayed on, looping the same seconds endlessly. The kitchen light went out on its own. The clock stopped at 03:33, and then the first sounds began. Moose. But this time, they came from inside the house. He rushed to the hallway and saw the door to the back room slightly open. He pushed it with the shotgun, and there she was. The mud child, crouched, drawing on the floor with her finger. When she noticed she was being watched, she turned slowly and smiled with a mouthful of teeth. Too many. The face was that of a little girl, but with calf-like features stitched into her skull, and her eyes white completely. As if she were already part of the herd, she pointed to the window. Raphael, almost in a trance, approached and looked. Outside, the cows were still there, but now all of them were facing the sky. And in the middle of the circle, lying on the ground, they formed a spiral of bodies, their horns intertwined at mathematically perfect angles, forming an ancient pattern he had seen before, on the walls of the burial chamber. When he turned back to the child, she was gone. In her place, a leather mask and a note, written in fresh blood. "You are one of us now. The bone lives." And then, the house's floor creaked violently. Something was coming up. When dawn teased through the ever-present mist, the sky remained still, cast in the same leaden shade of days past, with no promise of sun or clarity. Raphael awoke on the living room floor, his face pressed against a dark stain of dried blood, his body soaked in cold sweat. The shotgun lay far from him, and the front door was wide open. Outside, the cows had vanished, no hoofprints in the dirt yard, no sound, no presence. Only the echo of what had been left behind, the mask, the bloodied note, and the bone. He didn't know when or how the bone had returned to his hands. It was the same one he'd unearthed days earlier, the one he thought he'd sealed inside a jar with tape. Now it sat on the table, clean, polished, marked with symbols he had never seen before. Carvings, deep, spiral-grooved markings, repeating in patterns like alphabets from another time, another origin. Raphael photographed the bone using an old film camera he found in the back room and walked 2 hours to the nearest town, where he found an old retired professor, a collector of sacred art, and enthusiast of Afro-syncretic religions. The old man paled at the photo. Trembling, he asked Raphael to leave. He said only one sentence before slamming the door shut. "That's Kosa of the entrails, ritual of the sown herd. What you found wasn't a bone. It was an invitation." Raphael returned to the farm breathless, nauseous, certain that he was no longer in control of his stay. Something, since the beginning, had allowed him to arrive, and now it demanded that he remain. He placed the bone in the sink, cleaned it again with alcohol, but the markings reappeared every time he turned his back. Upon closer inspection, he realized the carvings weren't ornamental, they were instructions. The lines connected, forming a map, not of a place, but of a body. There were vertebrae, ribs, joints, cranial tracings, a human body rendered in an ancient code, indicating incisions, seals, substitutions. And at the center, written in larger script, "You shall receive the soul without killing the flesh. You shall speak through another's mouth. You shall dream what was slain." That's when Raphael realized the bone wasn't merely a fragment of someone buried. It was a key to access something still alive, even without a body. He looked through the window and saw, far out in the pasture, the cows once again arranged in a circle. But now, at the center, there was a hole, a wide crater, as if the earth itself had opened its mouth. Unable to resist the pull, he walked to the field, his feet sinking into warm mud. At the center of the crater, he found an altar made of leather, skulls, and rusted metal. Atop it, another bone, identical to his. And when he touched it, everything went black. The sky vanished. The sound died. Time collapsed. Raphael was hurled into a brutal trance where images flashed through his mind. Women bound and buried alive beneath bleeding oxen, men stitching calf faces onto children, a ritual with candles jammed into the nostrils of a burning living bull, and the farmer, much younger, offering his own son to the earth. He awoke on his knees, his face caked in mud, his nose bleeding, and the bone in his hand, now warm, like living flesh. And without knowing how, he began to murmur in a tongue he had never studied. Words sprouted from his mouth like seeds from the pit of his throat. Siwa, Mametu, Kosa Leum. And when the last word fell, a low moo echoed behind him. He turned. The mud child was there again, seated atop the altar, eyes still white, but now she was speaking with his voice. The voice that came from the child's mouth didn't belong to the present. It was his, Raphael's, but drawn out, distorted, as if being passed through a filter of old, forgotten dreams. The words came slowly, in short phrases, broken by choking noises, and the breath of something underground. She said, "I was the first." Then the mothers came, and then she smiled, revealing bare gums from which teeth sprouted in impossible directions, like twisted branches of a cursed tree blooming in darkness. Raphael staggered back to the farmhouse, no longer certain if he still inhabited the world of the living. When he entered the house, he found the farmer sitting at the table, as if waiting for him. On the table sat a bottle of cachaça, a hardcover notebook, and a loaded shotgun. The old man, who had never spoken more than fragmented phrases, now spoke with terrifying clarity. "You've heard what they sing down there, haven't you?" he began. "I heard it too, when I was a child. It never stops. Not even when we die." Raphael sat down. The old man slid the notebook toward him, opening it to the middle, where yellowed pages contained handwritten accounts, dated as far back as 1894. The entries described in near liturgical detail the massacre of a Quilombola community that had once lived on this land, then known as Forest of the Dark Men. The official version claimed that the community had been attacked by gunmen hired by an indebted baron, interested in clearing a path for a railroad. But what the notebook recounted went beyond that, far beyond. According to the writings, the survivors, women, children, elders, had been here offered to the earth in a pact sealed with the land itself, not to die in silence, but to inhabit the cattle forever. The landowners, the journal said, had learned from the horror. They discovered that if victims were buried beneath cows about to give birth, the soul wouldn't die. It would transfer, passed like a seed from one womb to another. The calves were born with human eyes, and some with too many teeth. When the first signs appeared, the ranchers fled, but the land did not forget. It demanded renewal, a new body, a new bond. Each generation, the earth asks for one, the farmer said. My grandfather gave his daughter, my father his wife. I gave my boy. Now it's your turn. Raphael's eyes widened, but he couldn't scream. His throat locked up, as if invisible hands were squeezing it from the inside. The old man rose slowly and pulled up his sleeve. Beneath the sagging skin, Raphael saw scarred eyes, dozens of them. And then the farmer finished. Once you hear it, you never unhear. The land whispers to the bones. At the back of the house, the television turned on by itself, showing footage of bodies being dragged by oxen, like ritual torture chambers. Children in leather masks watched silently, and in the background, a symbol drawn in mud, the spiral. Always the spiral, always turning counterclockwise. Raphael closed the notebook with sweaty hands. His fingernails were dark, his teeth loose. When he spat into his palm, a chunk of gum came with it, and the ground beneath his feet trembled, stronger, louder, as if something giant and starving was digging its way into the world. Raphael woke up on the porch floor not knowing how he had gotten there. The previous night was a blur of disfigured voices, overlaid images, and the metallic taste of blood on his tongue. The massacre notebook was still resting on his chest, open to a new page, one he was certain he had never read. On it, written in fresh ink, was a single paragraph. When blood is spilled in the womb of the soil, time seals itself and flesh listens. The soul of the dead grows like a root, and the ox carries its voice. There is no return, only transformation. He stood up with difficulty. The sky was darker than usual, stained by a dull red that seemed to ooze from within the clouds. Something was wrong with the air, heavier, denser, as if the atmosphere had curdled. The oxen were gathered again in the distance, standing still, staring at the house. But now, among them, walked 3 human figures, naked, covered in mud, their faces sewn shut with leather masks, and their arms ending in hooves. Raphael ran to the barn. He needed to understand what was happening to his body. His nails were cracking, his joints popping into new positions, and he was beginning to hear sounds inside his head that belonged to nowhere. Moose, whispered prayers, muffled laughter. Inside, he found the newborn calf, the same one that had seemed to follow him with its eyes in those first days. But now, she wasn't alone. Beside her lay 7 human hearts, arranged in a mandala, and at the center, a rudimentary knife made of bone and bronze, engraved with the same spiral symbol. At the back of the barn, a linen-draped box caught his attention. Pulling the cloth aside revealed a hidden altar, a set of antique surgical tools, medical books mixed with African grimoires, and labeled vials. Among them, one with his name, Olil Raphael A. Lima, incomplete blessing. He opened the vial, and the scent of oxidized iron flooded his nose. Inside was a single drop of dark blood, suspended like hardened resin. The old farmer appeared behind him, whispering, "If you don't finish it, it'll be born twisted. It'll scream from within forever." Then he laid a thin book on the table, a red cover bound with strands of human hair. Raphael opened it with trembling hands and read the title, Quintamba di Casa, The Blessing of Blood. It was a ritual manual detailing how to perform the transfer of the soul from soil to living flesh. He discovered, horrified, that the process required the sacrifice of an animal born of cursed earth, followed by the incision of his own blood into the mouth of the cattle, sealing the communion. It wasn't just spiritual, it was surgical, chemical, corporeal. Raphael collapsed, sickened, but already felt the ritual pulsing within him. His dreams were filled with images of bloodletting, cesarean cuts made with bone knives, cows birthing human hands, and his own image floating among viscera, being sewn into a womb of clay. When he slept, he dreamed of damp corridors of earth where eyes grew from the walls and teeth sprouted like roots. And when he woke, his skin itched, as if it were adjusting to another form. The farmer placed a bowl in front of him. Inside, a thick, reddish-brown liquid bubbled gently, without heat. He said only, "Drink, or they drink from you," and vanished. Raphael picked up the bowl with hands that were no longer entirely his, and as he brought it to his lips, he felt the breath of the oxen surrounding the house. The circle had formed again. The sky was darkening once more, and within it, something was ready to be born. The taste of the liquid was indescribable, thick like coagulated blood, warm like milk straight from the vein, but with a metallic undertone that scraped down the throat and left a bitter trail to the stomach. Raphael could barely swallow half before vomiting on the porch floor. But what came out wasn't vomit, it was mud. Mud and short hair soaked in a grayish fluid. His mouth throbbed, as if his teeth were rearranging themselves. He staggered into the yard, panting like a wounded animal, and there he found the farmer, sitting beneath the porch awning, a machete stabbed beside him, and an expression that no longer seemed human. The old man was staring at the horizon, but there was no horizon, only the whiteness of the stagnant sky and the sound of the oxen, breathing in the distance, in unison. Raphael dropped to his knees in front of him, unable to speak. The farmer then sighed deeply and, for the first time, spoke like someone carrying a sentence. "I was the first who didn't want to do it," he said. "I tried to break the cycle, burned the altar, killed the animals, fled the land. But the land dreams. And when it dreams, it wakes up inside us." He paused, pulled an object from his pocket wrapped in cloth, and handed it to Raphael. Inside was a piece of tanned human skin, branded with a hot iron inscription. "No herd without blood, no mouth without bone." "It belonged to my wife, the old man muttered. "She tried to save our boy. She dug up the body of the first on her own. And when she touched the spiral, the voice entered her. After that, she gave birth with a sealed womb. What came out cried from within, and her flesh rotted while she was still alive." Raphael wanted to ask questions, but he couldn't. His throat burned, his tongue felt heavy. The farmer continued, "The oxen, they're not oxen anymore. They're breathing tombs. Each one carries an unburied soul. Each one keeps a memory of what was done here. When they moo, it's mourning. When they march, it's a reckoning. And when they look into your eyes, they're trying to remember who you used to be." By now, Raphael realized the transformation was inevitable, not just in the body, but in the mind. Memories that weren't his began to surface in flashes. Naked men running through the woods, children tied with vines, songs murmured from deep pits, women tearing out their own eyes so their souls wouldn't be seen. And in every fragment, the same background sound, long, dragging moos coming from beneath the earth. The farmer stood with effort, opened his shirt, and showed his chest. Where the heart should be, a spiral mark was carved deep into the flesh, but it pulsed, already pulsed as if something inside was still beating. "They gave me more time, but only until you arrived," he said, pressing his chest with a finger. "Now it's your turn to keep. They need a new body, a new herd, and you're already marked." Then, with a calm gesture, the old man drew the machete and slit his own belly open, from top to bottom, like a butchered animal. He didn't scream, he didn't fall. He simply stood there with his intestines exposed and blood pouring in silence. Inside the opened cavity, Raphael saw not entrails, but soil, living earth, breathing mud, a spiral of boiling clay in motion, turning slowly, calling to him. The old man smiled, eyes clouded, and then whispered, "When the flesh dies, the bone sings, and collapsed, dead on the porch. The farmer's body lay sprawled on the porch floor, but it didn't smell like death. It smelled like wet clay, old blood mixed with curdled milk. Raphael stood frozen before the sight, the viscera opened like cracks in fertile soil, the pulsating mud leaking from the ribs as if each bone carried a living vein, and the spiral carved into the chest, now slowly closing by itself, like a sated mouth. He didn't scream, didn't cry. He simply stood up with the still, warm machete in his hands, eyes fixed toward the corral. Something inside him whispered that there was no turning back. Either he sealed what had been opened, or he would be swallowed with everything else. He walked to the pasture, his body throbbing. Each step felt like sinking into a swamp. The vegetation around him died beneath his feet, as if it sensed the weight he now carried. Arriving at the crater, the hole formed in the center of the cow's circle days earlier, he found the altar still intact, the bones laid out in a mandala, the hardened hearts, the bronze knife embedded in the center of the earth. But something had changed. The soil around it was dry, cracked, as if ready to burst wide open. From below rose a thick yellow vapor, reeking of ancient bones and sweat. It was as if the womb of the earth was about to give birth to something that should never have been conceived. Raphael poured alcohol over everything. The bones, the remains, the symbols, the altar, the hearts. He soaked every last fragment with fury. Then he lit his lighter with trembling hands. The flame hesitated for a moment, as if resisting the very air, but then ignited, and he threw the fire. The first sound was like flesh sizzling, the second like a choked moo. The third was a scream from the earth. The flames rose in a spiral, spinning in the same direction as the carved symbols. But instead of consuming, they were absorbed, sucked into the ground. The fire didn't spread. It descended, pierced the soil like a needle through flesh. And then the crater roared. A deep, ancestral sound, like 1,000 lungs filling with air for the first time. And from the center, something began to emerge. It was massive, too massive, but shapeless. A mass of flesh, bone and mud interwoven, covered in human eyes that opened and closed with each pulse. Horns appeared and vanished between folds, and mouths screamed from places where no faces existed. It was the soul of the herd, what remained of what had been buried. And now it tried to rise, to take the world it had been denied. Raphael screamed, but no sound came out. His feet wouldn't move. The air had turned to stone, and then the ground exploded, but not with force, with hunger. A whirlpool of mud opened beneath his feet, swallowing the altar, bones, relics, flames, offerings. One by one, the elements of the ritual were devoured as if they had never existed. What remained was a smooth field, clean, as if nothing had been disturbed. But Raphael knew. He knew that the earth doesn't calm. The earth only digests. Behind him, the cows lay in a row, all motionless, all belly up. And in the sky, a spiral of dark clouds began to slowly rotate above the farm. When he returned to the house, he found the door wide open, the farmer's body gone, and in its place, a photograph pinned to the wall. It was an old black and white photo of a family of 4, 3 adults and 1 child. The woman held the hand of a boy about 5 years old, and the man standing beside her was Raphael himself, dressed as if in the year 1900. And behind him, smiling faintly, stood the open-throated priest. Raphael dropped to his knees, and then he felt it, the warmth rising through his guts, like a thick, hot liquid flowing beneath his skin. His hands opened by themselves, his eyes darkened, and in his mind only one word remained: heard. That night, Raphael didn't sleep, he didn't even blink. His eyes burned, yes, as if filled with sand, as if something behind his eyelids scraped from within. But he didn't shut them. He couldn't, because he knew if he closed his eyes, he would see through others. The heat moving under his skin didn't fade. On the contrary, it climbed up his legs, inflamed his stomach, trembled in the bones of his spine. Something inside him was waking up, something he hadn't invited, but that now lived in his flesh, as if it had always belonged to that body. At dawn, the sky was frozen, no sound, no wind, no birds, everything suspended. Raphael walked out of the house like one stepping over the threshold of a desecrated temple. The cattle still grazed, but their movements were strange, slow, almost rhythmic. They had new marks on their skin, some shaped like human hands, others with those now familiar spirals. In the middle of the field, on the highest point of the pasture, lay a newborn calf, small, still, lying on the dry earth, as if it had been born there centuries ago. But what froze him in place was the face. It was a calf with human eyes. Not metaphorically, actual human eyes, glassy, blue, expressive, with dried tears in the corners and a deep sorrow that could not be translated. When Raphael approached, the calf looked back at him, without blinking, without fear, and then it smiled. A small, sad smile, far too human for that mouth to carry. Raphael knelt, hand outstretched, and touched the creature's muzzle. He felt warmth, he felt memory, and instantly his mind was flooded. Images burst behind his eyes. A burning Quilombo, men being dragged by cattle, a black woman giving birth inside a pit, the blood-covered fetus handed to a priest who was stitching a rosary made of teeth. Then, the same priest kneeling before a corral, chanting in a tongue that fused Latin and Kimbundu. In the background, the same altar, always it, always the bone, always the mud. Raphael stumbled back with a silent scream. But when he stood, he noticed the calf was following him with its eyes. More than that, when Raphael took a step, it did too. Not with its legs, but with its head, as if they were the same, as if they shared a single axis. When Raphael stopped, the calf mooed, a human sound, and within the sound, his own name. Raphael. The sound was impossible. No animal throat could produce it. But there it was. He heard it clearly, like a small child trying to call someone who had already died. The calf came closer. Its body trembled slightly, and beneath its fur, Raphael saw something was moving inside it, something with fingers. Panicking, he ran back to the house and rummaged through the farmer's belongings in search of answers. He found an old cassette tape labeled Birth ES. He placed it in the recorder. The sound was grainy, muffled, but audible. Crying, wind, mooing, and then a woman whispering, "If it's born, the cycle closes. But if it listens, it won't ever forget. The flesh will remember. The flesh will remember. The flesh will..." The tape stopped on its own. The recorder caught fire. Small flames flared up from the buttons, and the device melted without warning. Raphael poured water over it, but the fire vanished as quickly as it came. When he looked out the window, the calf was still there, staring at him, but now it was no longer alone. Behind it were others. Mastella spurs, those with stitched faces, human eyes, mouths whispering names, and they all had the same look, starving. Night fell without warning. Time no longer obeyed the rules of men. The hours slid like blood on plastic, cold, viscous, aimless. Raphael locked every door, though he knew it would not protect him. The windows rattled with winds that touched no leaves. The wooden floor creaked as if it were breathing. And the calf, the first one, now slept beside the porch like a guard dog from the underworld. Its human eyes closed at times, yet still saw. Raphael could feel it. He saw the world through them. As if it were a living extension, a new sensory organ rooted in his own nervous system. He turned the house upside down, searching for more answers, more texts, more clues, but found only a small journal hidden under the bed. It belonged to someone who came before. Not the farmer, but another veterinarian. A man named Dr. Nivaldo L. Batista, who had worked on the farm for only a few months in 1971. The notes were fragmented, frantic, as if written in moments of clarity during bouts of madness. In one of the central pages, it read, "Ritual not complete. Chosen one arrived late. Earth didn't close. They walk, they ask, they listen, needs a new mouth, needs a speaking body, needs awakened blood." Raphael understood. The ritual performed decades ago had failed. The collective soul of the buried had not been sealed. It had scattered. And now he, Raphael, was the final vessel, the container in which all would reunite, a living channel between earth and bone. But for the process to be complete, one requirement had yet to be fulfilled. The sacrifice, the external flesh, the intruder, the body that seals the cycle. He left the house and headed toward the crater in the pasture. It was now covered, but Raphael knew the surface hid the abyss. He carried in his hands the bronze knife and the marked bones he had recovered from the previous altar. Upon arrival, he found the calf there, waiting, lying down, submissive, as if it knew its time had come. But Raphael couldn't do it, even knowing what awaited, even hearing the voices inside his head whispering, "Close it, close it, close it." He couldn't. Instead, he looked at the calf and said, "Give it to me. Take it from me." The calf stood with effort, approached, and then, with its forehead, touched Raphael's chest. Everything went dark. What followed was a continuous nightmare. Raphael was lying in a kind of clay chamber surrounded by bodies, whispering bodies. One of them kissed his face and said it was his mother. Another bit his heel and said it was his son. A third licked his eyes and said he was now the new gate. He saw the ritual, the real one, performed by men wearing masks made of human skin, by pregnant women buried up to their necks, by children sewn alive inside cattle. He saw the first transmutation. He saw the exact moment when the earth began to have memory. He awoke on the porch at dawn. His clothes were soaked. His chest ached. Spiral markings covered his entire body, back, belly, arms, even his tongue. And then he knew the ritual had been sealed, but not the right way. One death was still missing. He walked to the mirror and saw his reflection, but his face was no longer his. It was him, yes, but done with someone else's eyes, as if thousands of souls were stacked behind that glass, fighting to see through him. And then the voice returned, clear, inside the mind, inside the bones, inside the clay. "You are the speech of the field, the last mouth. Only you remain." The sun rose, but its light never reached the farm. Everything remained wrapped in an eternal dusk, a golden haze that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, not the sky. Raphael walked slowly, barefoot, his skin covered in cracks like dry clay, about to crumble in the wind. His eyes burned, but he did not blink. There was no reason to. Blinking would mean denying what he now saw clearly. He was the soil. He was the herd. He was the mouth of the cycle. And what now lived inside him was memory. At the farm's entrance, he saw something new, a wooden cross planted between the cornfield and the cattle pen. Hanging from it was the body of the calf with human eyes, crucified, stitched by the limbs, still bleeding. Its head had been twisted backward, but its eyes remained open. They wept. The blood dripped in spirals down its body and fell into small holes in the earth. With every drop, a mooing sound rose from the ground, a sound that resembled drowned human voices trying to say names. Raphael knelt. He was tired, not from physical exhaustion, but from existing with two wills, his and theirs, because now he understood the ritual had never ended. Every time someone new steps onto that land, the spiral begins again. Because the earth is never satisfied, it feeds on guilt, on denial, on fear, and it always keeps a final offering for itself, the one who tries to run. He thought about fleeing, leaving the farm, vanishing into the world, forgetting. But when he stood, his feet were stuck, fused to the ground. The clay had risen over his heels, gripping his tendons, entwining his joints. He heard a crack, then another. His bones were beginning to turn inside his body, in spirals. He tried to scream, nothing. His throat was dry, his tongue heavy. And then from his mouth came a moo, a long, deep, mournful moo. He tried to pull his feet free, but where there had once been flesh, there were now roots, organic fibers pulsing, feeding from the earth, and returning memories to the flesh, memories that were not his. He saw everything, the massacre, the offering, the first cursed birth, the night rituals, the priest with the sewn open throat chanting prayers, the landowners dancing over bones, and he saw his own body in all those scenes, as if he had always been there. The final vision came as a whisper, a black spiral etched in the iris of his eyes, and within it, thousands of identical eyes slowly spinning like dead stars waiting to fall. That night, when the cattle returned to the pasture, they formed a circle around the house. One by one, they lay down in silence, and the house breathed deeply, as if it had lungs, as if it had awakened. And then, inside the pen, another calf was born, with blue eyes, and the face was Raphael's. At the center of the farm, the ground opened in a spiral, and the earth, satisfied, whispered in the wind, "The bone lives, the bone remembers, the bone speaks."